Welcome back to Buffalo Niagara Waterkeepers Podcast, Between Two Great Lakes. I'm Adam Zaremski. For the show, we're going to get right into it. I'm here with Margaux Valenti, our legal director. She's here to answer the big question, why do we call this show Between Two Great Lakes?
Because it's true. We are sitting between two Great Lakes, Adam.
Is that it? That's the main reason?
And because New York State is a Great Lake state. That's why it matters.
I knew I had you on the show for a reason. Thank you.
Yes, my favorite thing to shout about.
So our focus will be on the fact that New York is a Great Lakes state. But first, how'd you get to be one of Waterkeeper's, experts on things Great Lakes related?
I think it started with a healthy obsession with dredging and, law school.
Okay.
I came to Waterkeeper from a Great Lakes policy background. I had worked for a Great Lakes organization in Michigan, and in addition to my legal role, I do a lot of our policy work, which is all Great Lakes focused at the state level and regional level.
And with dredging, that would be related to the Buffalo River. You've done a lot in that region, which flows into a Great Lake.
Yes, so I have been managing the Buffalo River project for the last couple of years, but the Great Lakes are also shipping channels, so they have a lot to do with dredging and the movement of goods, and they have been channels of commerce for a long time for American history.
You've been dealing with a lot of that for years, so that's why we had you on to discuss New York is a Great Lakes state.
Yes, because New York likes to forget that it's a Great Lakes state, so we're here to remind them.
Now, we primarily focus on Lake Erie, correct? Lake Ontario is part of the New York is a Great Lakes state. Our priority, I guess I'd say, if that's accurate, is Lake Erie?
Yes, it's twofold. So policy-wise, we care about all of New York's Great Lakes, which is Lake Erie and Ontario, but also the St. Lawrence River. But as a keeper, we have to have a jurisdiction, and our jurisdiction is the Niagara River watershed, which will be expanding to the Pennsylvania line. So our physical projects are along the Lake Erie shoreline, but our policy work is about all of the Great Lakes.
We have a ton of shoreline that is bordering this area. How much does New York cover?
Yeah, so here's the thing. There are 8 Great Lakes states that border the Great Lakes. New York State is the second largest Great Lakes state by landmass in the Great Lakes Basin. And what I mean when I say that is that any rain that falls within the watershed is going to make its way into the Great Lakes or the St. Lawrence, and 47% of New York State is within that basin. We have over 700 miles of shoreline, which, for our downstate friends, I did Google, it is less than Long Island, unfortunately.
We wanted to say we were bigger.
We hoped. We really hoped.
But it's still, that's a huge amount. 700 miles of shoreline?
Yes.
I guess because there is such a large boundary of that for New York. That's why we're trying to promote this idea of New York is a Great Lakes state, because there is a lot of area we cover.
That, and we're trying to remind New York that it's a Great Lakes state, and to remind the rest of the Great Lakes states that New York is a Great Lakes state. So there's a couple of things. The Great Lakes states often operate as unit because we recognize that this shared resource that we all share, these 8 lakes, are essentially just a large river system. They start up in Minnesota and they end over here at the St. Lawrence, but the water is constantly moving. And so a good couple of years ago, we'll call it 2008, the governors of the 8 states got together and they wrote a compact to decide how to use the water of the lakes. And they actually had it ratified by the feds in 2008. So it is a enforceable federal law on how we use the water. But the trick here is that the Great Lakes are often thought of by people outside of the Great Lakes as a Midwest thing. And although Buffalo is Midwest nice, this is still New York. So we have a bit of an identity crisis where we have one foot in the Midwest and one foot in the Northeast, and yet we're the second biggest Great Lakes state. And so we're trying to get the Chicago-based folk to look east, and we're trying to get Albany to look west.
Because we want to make sure they're addressing the needs and issues that are going on here. We want to make sure it's not forgotten.
Yeah, we don't want New York State to get left out of Midwest discussions. And New York also is a bi-coastal state. And the New York-New Jersey harbor is massive. There's a ton of oceanic coastline in Long Island. A lot of our state funding is pushed together on an ocean and Great Lakes line. So we have this shared resource, and we need the decision makers who are downstate and the more of the people are in New York City to look west and remember that we are also a Great Lakes state.
It is kind of wild when you think of that because, that New York City, New Jersey area, big port section, dealing with a lot of water. but there's a lot of landmass of New York in the middle.
Exactly.
And so I guess I could see how people might not think of like the waterways necessarily. Like we go to them, but you wouldn't consider it as being such a huge impact.
Right. The way I think of it is New York is, 5 different places. New York City is a life of its own. The capital region has its own interests, and the Hudson is a source of drinking water, the Hudson River. And then you've got upstate, and then you've got Western New York, and we all just kind of live in our bubbles dealing with our local issues.
So we want to continue talking about that messaging for New York, but with the compact for those 8 states that signed it, what was...
Can you name the 8 states, Adam?
I thought the host was going to ask the questions. I'm going to make a go at it. We've got New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, Michigan. I lost count.
You got 3 more.
Wisconsin?
Yep, 2 more.
Indiana?
Yeah, that's the hard one. The last one's easy.
Well, don't tell me that because now I'm stuck.
It's big.
That makes this even worse because I'll leave this in here for people to realize I couldn't figure. What's the last one?
Minnesota.
Sorry, Minnesota. I did not mean to leave you out. They got together. What was the thought? Like, what are they trying? What's the compact doing, I guess?
So honestly, there's a couple of agreements that rule the Great Lakes, but essentially the compact is about water quantity. And at the time, there was talk of moving Great Lakes water out west to handle some of the drought issues because the Great Lakes are 20% of the world's fresh water, but they have a very limited recharge rate, meaning if you pull too much out of the water, the levels will drop, and we depend a lot on our rain and snowfall to recharge the lakes. And so the governors saw this worry coming, and they wrote a compact saying that in order for water to leave the basin, they have to have unanimous consent. So all of those 8 states you just described have to agree to allow Great Lakes water to leave the basin. So it was to protect the quantity.
Is it just that element, or are there other aspects of it, like pollution elements, or
the compact is essentially about quantity, but there are other agreements that are more scientifically based and deal with quality issues.
Okay.
And that's where we get things like the Area of Concern program, which the Buffalo River is an area of concern. That's actually an annex to the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway Water Quality Agreement.
Now, 8 states, is Canada involved in that one? Because they're bordering up.
So Civics 101, states cannot make treaties with foreign countries. So the compact is just the 8 states, but the Water Quality Agreement and the compact has a sister agreement that does involve the Canadian provinces.
But we'll be discussing things like if something's happening, we probably have to.
Yes, they work together in tandem on those annexes. There are binational organizations, binational groups, binational subcommittees, and so we share a lot of the water quality issues with the Canadians.
I guess I hadn't thought of that too. You're talking about that recharge rate because, all this water is now coming from the headwaters region, flowing down into the Great Lakes. I guess you just kind of have to have this.
Well, and the other thing to remember too is these go all the way back. So there is something called the 1909 Boundary Waters Treaty, and the Boundary Waters Treaty is a federal treaty with Canada to govern the boundary waters from coast to coast. And that's where we get things like the International Joint Commission. They were actually made in a post-Civil War, pre-Great Depression treaty between the 2 nations.
Okay.
And so the IJC oversees the international issues with the Great Lakes.
So protecting the Great Lakes has been a long time thing. People recognized it and wanted to make sure this area is protected.
Absolutely.
Because as you said, 20% of the fresh water in the world is located here.
Absolutely.
We've got New York as a Great Lakes state is the messaging. Who needs to hear this?
Everyone. Everyone needs to hear this. We have a bit of an identity crisis, and we have 1 foot in the Midwest and 1 foot in the Northeast. You can't tell a New Yorker that they're from the Midwest, but you can't tell someone from downstate that Buffalo, New York is the same as downstate New York because they are different worlds. And we actually get split between 2 EPA regions. So the Great Lakes National Program Office is in the Chicago office of EPA, which is Region 5, but New York State is in EPA Region 2, which is in New York City. So we actually, when we get grants and federal programs, we have to respond to both the Great Lakes office and the New York office.
That's got to be difficult.
It can be incredibly confusing for everyone, but it's just why we're here constantly reminding everybody that New York is also a Great Lakes state, and it's the New York City office of the EPA needs to also know about the Great Lakes issues, even though those people are in Chicago. We're the bridge between the East and West.
Does it seem like, maybe from your experience or from past years of working on Great Lakes, has there been elements of Lake Erie, Lake Ontario shorelines being left out of discussions, or New York being left out, where the Midwest, like you're saying,
Yeah, I have seen a presentation from a federal agency that will not be named that ended at Ohio. Sometimes the Great Lakes maps end at Pennsylvania. And when you ask them why, they say, well, because this is a Midwest report. New York State is the second largest Great Lakes state. Oh, it is so infuriating to me. I have seen a group of humans from Michigan came over to give us a presentation, and they titled it Midwest, and they were lovingly attacked to never refer to New Yorkers as the Midwest.
So even people who are bordering it, part of this compact that you talked about, they almost, not that they don't recognize it, but maybe they just don't think about it as much. And
exactly. We're in a curious position where if it's not forefront in your brain, like, you know, my drive to work every day is along the Lake Erie coast for the entire 10 miles that I'm driving to the city. And if it's not in your face every day, you're not going to think about the issues. You're not going to think about where is my drinking water coming from. And this is the source for the city of Buffalo drinking water for a lot of Erie County. It's recreation, it's tourism, it's fishing. There's a ton of uses for the lake, but if it's not in your face every day, then you might not think of that. I mean, as a Buffalonian, Adam, do you think of New York City as New York?
I guess having been there, yes, but it is different. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's its own section. A different New York.
Yeah.
It's a different New York.
Like, it's part of New York, but they have an identity, right? Mm-hmm. Like we have an identity.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so that's with like that messaging. New York is a Great Lakes state. We're going to keep repeating it on this episode and going forward. But that's something I know you've had to deal with as far as like when you do trips to Albany, you're talking to lawmakers saying New York's a Great Lakes state. Like, how's that been? How's that been over the years?
Well, to the elected officials who are from here, it's an easy sell. But when I get to talk to some of our downstate friends or some of our Long Island friends, and I tell them we have 700 miles of coastline in New York State, their eyes get wide and they think, seriously? And then I explain to them that the Great Lakes run the entire north and west coast of New York. So yes, it's huge. And luckily, we have some good friends in statewide organizations and coalitions that we get to partner with to strengthen our message. So we're certainly not screaming in a crowded room alone.
What are some of those groups who are part of?
We work a lot with our statewide friends at Citizens Campaign for the Environment, who does have a Buffalo office, Environmental Advocates of New York, Audubon, the Nature Conservancy, lots of state and national organizations who do care deeply about the Great Lakes. And then we also partner on the other side, which is always one foot in each camp, with some of the regional groups. Like New York is a member of the Great Lakes Commission. All of the Great Lakes states have an appointee to the Great Lakes Commission, which was actually created by the legislation that ratified the compact. They created the Great Lakes Commission, which is headquartered in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And we work with groups like Alliance for the Great Lakes and Healing Our Waters Coalition, and they're all based in Chicago. And those are your big regional Great Lakes issues. So then we also are dealing with federal policy at a regional level, and how does this affect the Great Lakes altogether? And then we're dealing with New York State policy, and how do we make sure that we get funding and proper protections and what we need at a state level.
So when you go and you're talking to some of the politicians who might not know, or you're kind of informing of this, what are the key points you want them to know when you're informing them about New York as a Great Lakes state?
When we're talking to our politician friends, we want them to know that, honestly, what some of the critical issues are in the Great Lakes, because they're not the same as they might be in the ocean. You know, we don't have as many cute, fuzzy animals that we can sell them on, although the river otters are coming back, which is wildly important, and they are... For anyone listening, the river otters are the ones that hold hands when they sleep so they don't float apart. Those are river otters, and they're coming back. But we have different issues than some of the ocean side, and most importantly, the ocean isn't drinking water. The Great Lakes are our source of drinking water. Buffalo being the second largest city in New York State, we have some of the most sophisticated infrastructure, so we end up taking on some of the waste for some of the state. And so then when you want to start talking about water quality issues and things like PFAS in our discharge water is also our drinking water, and this is heavily regulated. I don't want to scare anyone. We're not in any kind of like grave danger, but just having the millions of people who drink from the Great Lakes Basin, we highlight that. We highlight the on-the-ground problems, which can often be erosion or the need for a habitat betterment along the shorelines, coastal resiliency. We've been doing a lot on wetland protection and the difference between freshwater wetlands. Like, there are two different laws for freshwater wetlands and tidal wetlands.
Gotcha. And so by sharing that message about, like how big the Great Lakes are along New York State, that can then inform them, and explaining that to politicians, people in power, like why we want to make these changes or when they're making laws and stuff like that.
Yep. And unlike some of our larger organization friends, the keepers often provide, because there are other keepers. There's the Hudson River keeper, there's the Peconic Sound keeper, there are other keepers in New York. We have an affiliate group in Chautauqua Lake, and we work with our keeper family as well. I should have mentioned them earlier, but the keepers often provide the boots on the ground. So we're showing up to these policy conversations, not saying like this is good generally for New York, but saying here's a map. You know, we're talking with Albany about plastic pollution, and there's the Attorney General's lawsuit against Pepsi about plastic pollution. And due to our work on the ground, we're able to show up to those conversations and say, last year we picked up this many thousands of pounds of trash, and guess what? 81% of it was plastic. And we know that because we have the data, and the data then helps inform better policies.
Right. So with this push on New York as a Great Lakes state, I hope people keep this in their mind as they're listening. New York is a Great Lakes state. New York is a Great Lakes state. Are we seeing success with this messaging?
Well, it's a little easier to sell success when you have successful things. So Buffalo has, you know, I don't have to tell you or the people listening that we have a rich industrial history, and that the Buffalo River was at one point purple. It was dead, according to the Federal Department of State, incapable of sustaining life. And so Lake Erie was considered dead.
I never heard the purple part.
Yes, the Buffalo River was purple because if you've ever heard of the Buffalo Color Peninsula, we still call it Buffalo Color. It was home to the Buffalo Color factory, which made indigo dye for jeans. And because this was before there were environmental laws and regulations that came out in the 70s, they would just discharge the dye into the river, so the river would actually be purple.
Huh.
So this is where we started, and now we're talking about a healthy tourism industry. As I mentioned, the river otter are coming back. We are seeing more sturgeon, and sturgeon are actually prehistoric fish that are like baby dinosaurs, and they live on the bottom of the lake, so they're harder to find, but we have protected habitat for sturgeon spawning right off of the outer harbor in the city of Buffalo. And when you can sell success, it's easier to remind people that they want to protect places they want to be. And we've actually seen a report came out a few years ago that said that most of the money from, it's called the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, it's a pot of federal funding that is used just for Great Lakes projects. It has shown a 3-to-1 return on investment in projects in the Great Lakes, but in the city of Buffalo specifically, we have over a 4-to-1 return on investment. So we're seeing people who want to live on the water. You used to go out to the Buffalo River 10 years ago and you wouldn't even know it was there. And now on a summer day, you can walk across the kayaks. And so then you're talking tourism dollars and you're talking economic development. And now you're getting people's attention. But it all starts with water quality. So this is a huge success story.
Right. And it's an ever ongoing aspect that we have to continue pushing the message, continually doing the work to.
Yeah, we got rid of industrial contaminants, and the Buffalo River has lost a lot of its really nasty heavy metals and PCBs, which I am not going to try to say polychlorinated biphenyls, which is what I actually think it is. But now we're talking about PFAS. Now we're talking about microplastics. Now we're looking at policies to mitigate what we call emerging contaminants. And PFAS isn't even really emerging anymore. It's being regulated at the state and federal level. So it's just ever ongoing, and it's a constant state of protection.
Are there any things coming up in the future with some of our partners along the Great Lakes, or with the compact, with the governors? Is there anything in the works as far as people might be interested to know about, or things that are being worked on to improve the Great Lakes?
The biggest test of the compact came out actually a good number of years ago, like pre-pandemic, probably 2017, and that was what's called the Waukesha diversion. And there's a city in Wisconsin called Waukesha, and they straddle the Great Lakes Basin, and so they had to actually make a request to divert Great Lakes water for drinking water because they had depleted their own drinking water wells. And I believe that they were successful, and so there is been a test of the compact in that way. But essentially, we're all working on water quality. We all, meaning the regional Great Lakes family, is working on water quality. We are looking at the AOC program, so the Buffalo River is an area of concern. The areas of concern, we could nerd out for a long time, Adam, but there's 40 of them in the Great Lakes Basin across all 8 states and the Canadian provinces. And they're the most polluted areas in the Great Lakes. So in New York, that is the Buffalo River, 18 Mile Creek in Niagara County, the Niagara River, the Rochester embayment, and a portion of the St. Lawrence at Akwesasne, so up in St. Regis Mohawk territory, by Messina, New York. The AOCs are continuing to better their metrics and get off of this area of concern list, which is the goal, so that you're no longer the most polluted place in the Great Lakes. And Buffalo River is almost there. Rochester will be done this year, so we're making huge strides. And then policy-wise, we're really looking at how can we continue lessening the PFAS that's being discharged into the water, and how can we lessen the plastics that are getting into the water. And so we're really looking at, stopping things at the source. That's been our big talk that people can hear about. And wetlands. We got a pretty big upgrade to our wetlands regulation in the last couple of years, and so there'll be new wetlands protections coming out at the state level in the next couple of years, which is hugely important.
Right, as you mentioned earlier, because it's this idea of everything's kind of flowing into the Great Lakes from the headwaters and wetlands, and trying to protect it so that these Great Lakes are healthy and vibrant.
Yeah, our wetlands work in both directions. They help to protect against erosion, and wetlands are, just as they describe, they're supposed to get wet, so they flood, and then they provide flood mitigation efforts. And upstream, they help to filter water and hold in pollutants to keep them from getting downstream. So our wetlands protection is critical.
Nice. Is there anything else you want to add about our topic today? What do you want to tell people? What do you want to leave them with?
Yeah, I want to leave people with the idea that New York is a Great Lakes state, and that it's a beautiful gift that we get to live on the water, and we have this resource out our back door. And Buffalo is also actually one of the only waterfront west-facing cities. So we are one of the only cities in America that gets those beautiful sunsets over the water. It's a gift, and I want people to remember that our Great Lakes are a one-time present from Mother Nature, and we have to protect them.
Well, thank you, Margaux.
Thank you, Adam.
Before you go, I just want to remind everyone, contributions from individuals are what make this work possible, what Waterkeeper is able to do on a day-to-day basis. For every dollar raised, Waterkeeper leverages that tenfold through securing grants and other funding to help deliver over 60 projects and programs each year. Donor dollars support our efforts to research and monitor our waterways, design projects, advocate for good policies, and even construct habitat and access improvements. These efforts in turn create a significant economic and environmental benefit for our community. In some cases, like our Buffalo River restoration, it has been shown to create a 40-to-1 return. So whether you can give $5 or $5,000 or more, please know your dollars stay local, will be multiplied, and will help make change in our waters and community. And many thanks again to the Buffalo-based band Snowbelt for their intro and outro music in this episode. You can find their songs and albums, including their latest album, Norris Avenue, on all streaming services. Check them out. Thanks again for listening. Be well and do good.